You nervous? Are we broadcasting? So we are live, and today we have a very special treat. As I was put out the promo, we got a tweet from Dave Rowlands who said, "Oh, good, my two favorite atheist philosophers," and I was like, "That's right, John. Score me up the best and the brightest." So I got the best and the brightest today, and we are going to discuss in some depth philosophy of mind and more specifically physicalist position. And so you guys want to introduce yourself? Who wants to go first? Emerson, you want to go first?
Sure. So my name's Emerson. I have a couple podcasts, Counter Apologetics and WaldenPod. I talk about philosophy of religion and philosophy of mind. I'm an atheist and a non-physicalist.
Cool. And Danny, you want to tell us who you are and why you do what you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Craig. I'm I love philosophy of mind. I've physicalism, studying physicalism, naturalism, all that stuff has pretty big implications on the work that I do in grad school. So that's why I end up talking about it. But I'm a grad school student at here, and I was about to dox myself, but I study philosophy at grad school. I have a channel, Phil Talk, where I review material, other content, as well as I interview other philosophers. So I love talking about this stuff. So thanks for having me on, Craig.
Yeah, I think you interviewed some people that Emerson likes. I'm not quite sure if Emerson likes Bernardo Castro, but I'm pretty sure he likes some of the other people you had on your channel. Don't actually know his position. So Emerson, you want to tell us whatever you feel like filling us in on about your position on philosophy of mind, whatever you think we should know.
Well, I started off as like a physicalist. I thought that phenomenal consciousness was just fully reducible to material brain states. It was like a weakly emergent phenomenon, the same way that like tables and chairs emerge and biological stuff. Just another case of weak emergence, which doesn't really have any severe ontic implications. So I started changing my mind about that when I realized that, if you want to be a realist about phenomenal consciousness, which I do, a realist about experience and that it's like something to be, that has like consequences. It's not just this free thing that easily fits into a physicalist framework. So, I started thinking more about that and started uncovering these problems. And for various reasons, ended up thinking that if consciousness emerged, it must have been a case of strong emergence. In other words, reductive physicalism couldn't possibly be true. So
were you reading Chalmers at this point?
Yeah. I was like listening to him. I had a really casual interest in philosophy of mind before I really got into it. It was just like philosophy of mind. I just thought it was so boring. Like I thought there was like every time I tried to look into it, I just thought this is just so tedious.
This is really boring.
And the thing that I eventually realized was like, oh, that's because this is on a physicalist paradigm. Like this is the stuff, these are the research projects and the questions that you encounter if you only work on a physicalist paradigm. That's why it's so boring. And then when I started listening to non-physicalists, I was like, oh, this is where all the interesting stuff is happening. So I only got into philosophy of mind once I, kind of was already somewhat suspicious of physicalism. So I had some pretty strong prejudices against dualism that are not as strong today. So I went straight from like, a radical form of materialism to a radical form of non-physicalism called Panpsychism. It's kind of similar to idealism. It's just sort of like a consciousness-only monism, if you're not familiar with it. But yeah, we can get more into that later. But I kind of divide my credences between like panpsychism / idealism, just some kind of like consciousness first or consciousness-only monism, and then dualism on the other hand. And I'm also kind of intrigued by just agnosticism, because this question can't really be empirically settled, in favor of physicalism or against physicalism or in favor of dualism or panpsychism or whatever. Can't really be empirically settled. And the considerations are, I don't know. I'm sympathetic to someone who just wants to give up and says that like, maybe we should just be agnostic about this question because there's no way to empirically settle it. The considerations that lead people to one or another, it's just totally fraught. I don't know if there's any consensus about anything in philosophy of mind. So I'm not ready to give up just yet, but agnosticism or
That's
Mysterianism.
different from
It's
where
not
you
a
were.
crazy position.
That's kind of different from where you were last year when you were on my channel, right? You were more committed to panpsychism. I thought, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I misinterpreted that.
Actually, come to think of it, I was way more anti-dualist back then. Was that a long time ago when I was on the
think
channel?
it was last year. John, was that last year or was that?
Yeah, I think it was maybe like 8 months ago. So
Well,
maybe not that much, at least 6 months, I think.
That's a pretty dramatic shift then. I was hoping it'd be a longer amount of time, so I seem more principled and less flighty about it.
Whatever. I'm not sure.
It was
No,
10
that's
years
totally
back. That's right.
Yeah,
It was 10
I
years
think
back.
9-10 years ago.
So, Danny, you're free to tell us your position and hash it out, or you can just go off of that. It's up to you. Like I said, this is going to be somewhat spontaneous.
Yeah, when I got started I started with philosophy of religion, and when I was introduced to the various disciplines or sub branches of metaphysics, one of which was philosophy of mind, I just kind of dismissed it because I kind of had the same mindset as Emerson. I just thought that, okay, isn't that psychology, or are they going to start talking about like neuroscience and neurological states? I'm just not interested in that. It seems like it does seem empirical on the face of it. And then about a couple years ago, there were some atheists that I'd met that were dualist, and it kind of started me on this journey of on the philosophy of mind journey. And it led me to the sort of conclusion where, like, I did think that mind was wholly distinct from matter or from physical states, neurological states. Even as a Christian, because I deconverted from Christianity in 2020, I remember, thinking about the question very briefly about maybe what beliefs might be. And I just thought, oh, well, it's just in my head, it's my brain state, and that was even so. I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of people think that, like, it's kind of weird for atheists to take non-naturalist positions like dualism or even panpsychism. But I would venture that a lot of religious folk, Christians, if you just ask them, where are your beliefs, they're going to point right to their head, or they're going to talk about their brain or something like that. And so I know, so that's just sort of dispel, I think, the sort of like dichotomy that, well, if you're a dualist, you belong on the theist side, and if you're on some kind of naturalist physicalist, you belong on the non-theist side. And I had a similar attitude towards Emerson in terms of what philosophy of mind might be. But now I actually think philosophy of mind is like where it's at, because I think philosophy of mind is related to two other issues, other than just like having a broad sense of ontology or your ultimate reality kind of questions. Of course that factors in, but it factors into moral truths. I think how you construe yourself and how you relate to value and desirability and those sorts of things, right? I think there's implications there, and of course, and I already said that you have your ontology stuff, but also like things like free will. I think I was very interested in, and it seems like there are big implications on freedom of the will. And so, yeah, there are various arguments, but essentially, I think that one of the reasons why I'm definitely not a physicalist is that I think it completely undermines both senses of free will, both compatibilist and incompatibilist free will. I don't think that you can just be a physicalist and say, well, yeah, I can see why, libertarian free will might not be the right account on physicalism. And so kind of retract back into compatibilism as a way of like kind of dodging that issue. I don't think that's sufficient. I think that even on a compatibilist view, if you take physicalism, you're eventually going to hit hard determinism. So, I really, that's one of the reasons why I like philosophy of mind. It sticks its fingers in all the rest of the domains in philosophy. So.
Now, let me ask you a question before I open it up. You had Bernardo Kastrup on your channel like 3 weeks ago. I really thought that was a good interview. You're somewhat sympathetic to idealism, right? But you're not committed to it. Is that fair to say?
Well, I'm very skeptical of ontologies where we say everything is X.
Right.
Because if And that might be an unsophisticated version of idealism, even in physicalism, right? Daniel Stolger, who wrote the SEP article on physicalism, he also wrote a book called Physicalism, understands these ontologies as something like everything is physical, everything is mental, or instantiated by the mental or physical, respectively, something like that. So that's a more sophisticated version. But I'm still skeptical because I'm afraid that it kind of renders whatever you think the world is comprised of as kind of vacuous, and I can explain that later. But I am sympathetic to the extent that it seems like I'm representing the world. My mental states are
Right. That
representation of
seems
the world.
not debatable to me. We re-represent the world back to ourselves. That's how we perceive. I don't know if Emerson agrees with that, but that to me seems just like a given. The starting point is consciousness. That's the part that I'm sympathetic to.
Right. So I'm skeptical of the naive realism, the myth, just kind of having this direct access to the world. I don't know if that's going to be a good sort of, I would probably be on the idealist camp in terms of, that representational aspect of idealism. So.
Now, Emerson, you want to say whatever you want to say, whatever you think should be commented on.
There's a lot in philosophy of mind, and like that whole debate between representationalism and direct realism, or idealism. Like, I'm just kind of agnostic about that now. I never looked into it until like somewhat recently, because Michael Tai has done a lot of work on representationalism, and he was a kind of a big name physicalist who just kind of changed his mind and became some kind of panpsychist or pan-protopsychist or something. Convinced by the vagueness arguments, actually, which is kind of one of my main things I'm interested in. But yeah, so but I don't know. I'm just kind of agnostic about the representationalism and direct realism and stuff. For me, the common sense view, they say it's the direct realist view, but for me, it's representationalism. Like, it just seems like that's the intuitive default view, and you have to be kind of argued out of it. But I don't know. I'm just kind of agnostic about that question right now.
Since we've been talking about physicalism already, maybe if we could like lay out a sort of definition of it, what we understand physicalism to mean. That way, that'll help clarify our reasons for rejecting it later.
I can give what I take physicalism to be, if you don't mind. You can adjust my definition if you don't like it, but I just start saying that physicalism is the view that every concrete thing is physical, and that there's causal closure. Only physical things can causally influence other physical things, and physical things are the basic elements of physics, which is the fundamental physical science, and they have the properties that physics ascribes to them and nothing more. And they're exhaustively described by physics. So if you talk to a physicalist, they'll invariably bring up physical science and the elements of physical science. Like, well, no, I'm just particles, like arranged human wise or something like that. Like, they will at some point they will invoke the basic elements of physical science and say that's all there is, and that's kind of like the common sense affirmation of physicalism. So I think that if you want to start saying that there are properties of physical things that go beyond what physical science can say, then you're in kind of a gray area of whether you're a physicalist or a non-physicalist at that point. It kind of depends on how you flesh it out. But, panpsychists kind of start with that and say that there are things that physical science doesn't tell us about physical matter. And, we know things about physical matter because we're made of physical matter, things that, are not really described by physical science. So if you start getting into that territory, you're kind of like, you're at least bordering on non-physicalism already. So anyway, that's kind of my shorthand definition of physicalism.
Right. So like, would an example be like, I can look at my brain on an EKG machine as I'm thinking about the color red or something like that, but I won't see those facts about the color red on the sort of what science or what through technology that will sort of develop regarding the brain there from science. But I still have this sort of it's not just general, I guess, apprehension when I'm looking at the color red. That would be maybe a better example, because then you actually have the qualia there directly there. is that sort of it? That like the science, like the scientific third person perspective of the brain won't tell us what the brain is actually like thinking about, I guess.
Well, a physicalist would want to say that, I think. So, I mean, you'll have to talk to the physicalist, but typically they, they want to talk about fundamental physical science and then also like neuroscience. And they want to say that's all you need to explain consciousness. That seems to be how the term is used, that's like
that it will
what
reduce
physicalists are getting at.
eventually to some type of brain function of the brain, and that's it. Like Patricia Churchland's example was that once upon a time we didn't know that there were disease enzymes because they were invisible, and then we found out that like things like bacteria were affecting people, and she's like, the brain is probably going to work like that. There's stuff that we can't see about the brain, but we're going to find it out through physical science. We're going to find out one day that it's all the brain, and that's all we need to know.
Yeah, one day we'll do so much science that we'll stop believing in this spooky consciousness stuff.
Right, exactly.
Truly
That's
one
exactly
of
what
the
she called
foremost thinkers of our time.
spooky stuff. The spooky stuff of like, yeah, exactly. And it seems to me like I'm pretty sure Denny agrees with this too, but it seems like they're in principle irreducible one to the other, and that's the true essence of the hard problem of consciousness. That you have physical. That it does not seem that phenomenal consciousness in principle can even be reduced to strictly physical brain. Is that, Danny, is that how you see it? Or are you on the same page? What do you say?
Well, I do see it that way, but I think that I wanted to go back to what physicalism was. I think Emerson gave a theory view of physicalism where physicalism has to do with what that everything can be some kind of predicate of a physical theory. That is one kind of way to rend physicalism, but I think there are probably some issues with that rendering. In fact, there's a whole interpretation problem here in terms of what physicalism is. I've even met people that have affirmed that mental states are brain states, but they don't identify as physicalist or naturalist, given that there's an interpretation problem of what the thesis is in the first place. But the standard account in the literature is going to be something like everything is physical or necessitated by the physical. So physicalists are not going to understand, for instance, like the Supreme Court as like a physical object in the same way that maybe a basketball is a physical object, but they're going to think that it's one way or another necessitated by physical properties. And then there's a whole question of what a physical property is exactly. And then you have an interpretation problem there. But yeah, it is quite a hard thing to define. I take, if someone were to press me what the notion of physical might be, one thing that Emerson might agree on is that since he invoked physical theories is that it has to do with law-like causation. The idea is that when I drop the basketball and it bounces, there was necessity there, because that sort of object is governed by laws of causation. And even that rendition that I just gave is not adopted by many physicalists. So that's what's part. So the first problem is just defining what physicalism is, and is this a problem? It might be a problem for physicalists. If it's a problem for physicalists, it actually might be a problem for everyone that doesn't hold to physicalism, because we understand views like dualism and panpsychism and all of these idealism. It's sort of parasitic on our concept of the physical, right? The idea is that these are non-physical views of the world. And so what is it that we're rejecting when we're saying that I'm not a physicalist? So it's not just a problem for physicalists, it's a problem for us, to get a really good understanding of what physical means or natural means, because we're rejecting it. We're saying no to it, right? And then say to not be able to answer the question, what are you rejecting? It seems like a problem.
Well, I mean, I've got a substantive conception of what I'm rejecting, but the thing is, I have a more general view about, philosophically interesting terms and trying to analyze them such that there are no borderline cases or counterexamples. And I think it's just kind of pointless. Like, it's something I've been like, I recently spoke to Michael Huemer, and he kind of, said a similar thing and gave me more confidence, making me feel like I wasn't just being like anti-intellectual or something when I was saying like, it just seems really difficult, if not impossible, to give these like, necessary and sufficient conditions for these philosophically very broad terms, such that like, okay, this captures how everyone, uses the term or something like. So I don't know if we should be so quick to just say like, well, we don't have a substantive conception of the physical, so it's not even an idea that we can accept or reject, because what does physical mean? And it's so hard to analyze that term, and so hard to analyze like physicalism. Like, I'm happy to just whoever I'm talking to, it's like, what do you mean by physicalism? And you're going to get a different answer depending on if you're talking to just someone on the internet, or if you're talking to like an academic philosopher of mind. But I think that like my definition is maybe a little closer to the like academic philosopher of mind definition. Whereas if you're just on YouTube or something, you say, what do you mean you're a physicalist? They typically just mean phenomenal states are fully reducible to brain states, but they don't mean that in some kind of property dualist way, which, we can get into that. But, they mean that phenomenal states are fully reducible to brain states, and that consciousness emerged just in the same way that tables and chairs emerged, and that biological organisms emerged, and that sort of thing. So I think you just got to it depends on who you're talking to. I don't think you're going to come up with a definition. You're not going to come up with a definition that makes everyone happy, which is fine, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a spectrum of vagueness, right? I mean, everyone that I talk to pretty much uses the term bachelor or triangle the same way I do. And I'm just saying that I do have a concept of physical, and it has to do with laws of nature. Otherwise, I don't know what anyone else is talking about. And I'm gonna ask, what do you mean by physical if it's not governed by laws of nature? And part of the reason why I specifically say laws of nature is because our laws of physics, if the idea there is that I take physicalism to be some kind of metaphysical thesis, where we're not understanding the thesis in terms of theories that could potentially be replaced. It's not like if our theories of nature or physical laws, or any of the kind of work that scientists do, if that changes, it's not like the thesis of physicalism changes.
Well, I mean, just because it invokes scientific entities doesn't mean that it's not a metaphysical theory. Like saying there are nothing but whatever it is fundamental physical science thinks is the fundamental stuff, whether it's like strings or particles or a wave function or whatever. Like saying that that's all there is this kind of unverifiable metaphysical statement that you can find some things that lend support to it, but ultimately you're going way beyond what like the empirical evidence even could in principle settle. So since that's my description of physicalism, is it's intimately tied to physical science, and the conviction that physical science will give us everything we need to explain consciousness and all of nature, and so on. Like, I think that's an accurate depiction of how people actually use the term, but it is definitely a metaphysical theory, even though it invokes all these like scientific entities, and it tries to be like as scientific as possible. A lot of them don't even realize they're doing metaphysics, but it is still like a metaphysical theory. It's kind of unfalsifiable metaphysical theory, whether or not they realize it.
Yeah, maybe I misunderstood you. I think there's a difference between that which can be in principle approached from the sciences versus that which is or has been established in the sciences. I think there's a difference there, a significant one, because I'm saying that if you meant the former, then I'm sort of on board. Of course, then the question pushes back: what is it that the sciences can in principle study? But if it's the latter, where you are understanding physicalism in terms of what has been established by the sciences, I just take scientific truths to be contingent truths, but I take any kind of metaphysical theory to be a kind of affirmation of something that's necessarily true. I presumably physicalist, naturalist are are making a claim about the ontology across all possible worlds, and if they're not, then it becomes some kind of contingent view of how the world is, right? There could be physicalism could be true, or there could be another world in which it's not. And I think that they would want to push back against that. They really like to stick with their necessity there, I think.
I mean, I'm basically just making a descriptive claim here about what physicalists think based on, my interaction with them. And I rarely meet a physicalist who uses the word necessity in their definition of physicalism. Like, it just seems like there's this emphasis on physical science, and they're trying to say it's, about consciousness is just, they're saying it's just the brain. Like, they're not making it too complicated. They're like, yeah, consciousness is just the brain, we just need to do more neuroscience and we'll settle it, like, it seems like that's all they're really getting at. But I mean, when I'm rejecting that, my rejection of that is just saying that I think a complete physical description, physical in the way I've described it, is just never ever going to be enough to account for facts about consciousness. So that's what I mean. That's what they mean, I think, by physicalism, and that's what I mean when I say I reject physicalism.
Right. So if we wanted to sort of clearly lay out the distinction between, say, a physicalist thesis and an anti-physicalist thesis, it's just saying that, like, a total account of all the physical facts will be a complete explanation for consciousness. That's sort of the physicalist thesis. Mm-hmm. And then the anti-physicalist thesis is it's just, even with all the physical facts, you're not going to have a complete explanation of consciousness there.
So, I guess I was thinking physicalism in a more broad sense. It is applied in physical, in context of philosophy of mind. When one says that they're physicalist, they're just talking about the mind. They could be a Platonist otherwise, right? But I guess I was speaking to the general notion of, like, naturalism, physicalism, materialism. I take these to be synonymous. And so, I mean, of course, there are people that don't take them to be synonymous, and then I would just adopt their terms. But I think the idea is that either that the mind or mental states are physical states themselves, or they're necessitated by the physical, because we want to incorporate non-reductive physicalism. And what?
I don't want to incorporate non-reductive physicalism into anything.
Into physicalism? You don't want to incorporate non-reductive physicalism into physicalism?
No, it's incoherent. It's just property dualism. They're just like, they just don't want to, they're afraid to reject the word physicalism. But no, non-reductive physicalism is a contradiction in terms.
I'm very curious to why. I mean, why would you think, do you think that it's incoherent because of what they're stating, or do you think it just that non-reductive physicalists find themselves into, like, they find themselves committed to dualism? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. It's just dualism by a different name. I mean, like,
they would never say that, though.
Oh
God. So just that word, like, non-reductive physicalism. It's like, it's just already, like, it's been a long time since I've seen The Office, but I remember this scene with Michael where he was asked, like, would you, steal the bread to feed your family? And he was like, I would not steal the bread, and my family would not starve. So that's basically a metaphor for how I feel about non-reductive physicalism. They're just trying to, like, have their cake and eat it too, where it's like, okay, so phenomenal states are irreducible, but physicalism is still true. It's like, okay, so these irreducible phenomenal states, they emerged at some point in the causal chain, but that's not property dualism. And they're like, no, it's physicalism. It's like, no, it's just property dualism. That's what naturalistic dualists believe. It's an exact description of, like, Chalmers' naturalistic dualism.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I don't know what property dualism is anymore. I take property dualism to affirm that physical objects can have non-natural properties.
Non-physical properties.
Sorry, did I say non-physical? For my purposes, I'm sorry I just non-natural, non-physical. I take those to be synonymous.
You're gonna infuriate Emerson here, though.
But he said he
so-
just adopts the terms of whoever he's talking to. So
Yeah, I
no,
gotcha.
naturalism I think is distinct from physicalism.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, there are a lot of people that think that, but I'm just, the point is that I take property dualism to affirm that there are physical objects with non-physical properties, but that doesn't they don't accept necessarily like supervenience or emergence. I don't see, because that's how I see non-reductive physicalists, is that they understand, they adopt a different form of necessity other than the necessity that's seen in identity, where if A is B, there's some kind of necessary truth there. But they want to say that A or B supervenes on A in some kind of necessary way, given that if the properties of A change and the properties of B change, they're just trying. And in a sense, I do agree with you. It seems like they're trying to cheat by escaping identity and still maintaining necessity. But I just don't see how that collapses into property dualism at all.
Well, because they're saying they're distinct. You know, we have this non-reductive consciousness. It's distinct from the physical. It's irreducible, and it emerged. That's
But property dualists don't have to accept an emergent or supervenient relation, right? The whole point of non-reductive physicalism is to, yes, distinguish between A and B, but say that there's still a necessary relation between A and B, just not the one of identity.
Okay, they can say that.
But I mean, do you think that collapses into property dualism?
Yes.
For
the reasons I've already explained.
Yeah, because it wouldn't be like another substance that would be something that emerges, unless, I don't know, I guess maybe John Searle's sort of position is almost like a type of non-reductive physicalism, but he wants to say that the mind does have causal powers, but it is something over and above the brain in some sense. So it's not like, he'll explicitly reject property dualism, but there is a sense in which his position is hard to sort of distinguish from property dualism.
Wait, so John, would you say that just from this thesis alone, that physical objects like brains have non-physical properties? In what sense have I established any kind of necessity relation?
Well, like if we're saying it has non-physical properties, that is going to be a type of property dualism.
Right. But the whole point of non-reductive physicalism is to establish supervenience or emergence, right? But there I haven't talked about, if I just say physical objects with non-physical properties, where have I invoked supervenience or emergence? I don't think it seems like
I don't know if like a non-reductive physicalist is like necessarily committed to some sort of supervenience or emergent. Well, because like you could theoretically be a non-reductive physicalist panpsychist, maybe, if you wanted to say that like always for any physical object that exists, there's going to be this sort of mental quality to the physical object that is not reductive to the physical facts about the thing. And that wouldn't be like an emergence that takes place. Yeah, there's a sense in which, I don't know, it seems like non-reductive physicalism is not saying very much about what their position is. I guess the only way I could understand what they're saying is that there's the mental features to physical objects, and those mental features are not reducible to the physical features.
But they're still necessitated by the physical. That's what makes. I mean, I just take something like reductive physicalism. There's some kind of identity relation. And that's where you get necessity from. Non-reductive physicalism is say, hey, no identity. There's instead this other kind of relation. Let's call it supervenience or whatever, and that we get necessity. Dualists and property dualists are positing non-physical properties or non-physical substance objects, and they're affirming a distinction that a sort of distinction where no necessity is needed, right? There's no emergence, there's no supervenience, right? These emergence and supervenience, I take it to be ways of clinging on to necessity without saying identity.
Okay, I think I see what you're saying, that like non-reductive physicalism is making a larger commitment as to like the laws or structure to reality that causes there to be. Yeah, okay. Whereas property dualists, they don't need to be committed to that sort of strong sense. They can just say that there's a sort of contingent feature to reality.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now I understand the sort of contention you guys were having there. Okay.
But we can move on to maybe why.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really, I just don't see the motivation for non-reductive physicalism other than just an attachment to the word physicalism. But I mean, I just don't really care that much about the parsing of these terms. I care about, the actual substance of the view. So it's just, do you think consciousness is fundamental, or do you think it came about later in the evolutionary process? Like, do you think minds are late and local, or do you think that they're kind of fundamental and ubiquitous? So non-reductive physicalists think that mind is later, it came about later in the evolutionary process. And then the question is just like, okay, so what is consciousness? How did it come about? And it either collapses back into some kind of reductive physicalism, or it inflates into some kind of dualism. Again, you can call yourself whatever you want, but the thing I'm actually interested in is, where did consciousness come from? How did it come about? And anyway, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I just want to represent my opponents as best as I can. It's not about just using terms. I'm saying that if I'm charging a non-reductive physicalist with positing non-physical properties, right, that's a serious charge, and I don't think I would be licensed to in that charge. But the point also, I don't think I don't know if physicalism or non-reductive physicalism, whether it be non-reductive or reductive, have a certain position on how exactly they're emerged, whether it by evolutionary mechanisms or not. I just take that that sort of debate to be auxiliary completely, right? You can be a physicalist and not think that the mechanisms of evolution account for mental states.
Yeah, well, I didn't say that. I meant like when it came about, not exactly like when I said late in evolution, it was just a descriptive fact about what physicalists and property dualists tend to believe, that consciousness is this thing that came later in history. I wasn't saying that they all believe it's, explainable in terms of evolutionary biology.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, then I misunderstood you. My bad. But I guess if we're going back to why I think I would agree with you, Emerson, that non-reductive physicalism, where I kind of don't understand where they're coming from is that it seems like everything would supervene on itself, right? So if we understand the supervenience conditions, if there's a change in A, then therefore there's a change in B. Well, it seems like I supervene on myself, right? Like if there's a change in Danny, there's going to be a change in Danny's body or Danny's mind body, or whatever, right? Like it's just the idea is that everything is going to supervene everything, either on itself or on something else. So that's kind of one of the first objections that I kind of saw to supervenience and emergentism, but I didn't know if anyone had any thoughts on that.
Did you say that you were a property dualist?
I think I prefer the term perspectival dualist, but if you had to label me, I would be a property dualist. But it's very misleading because I don't think that the standard notion of property the standard view of property dualism is that physical objects with non-physical properties. I just think that being a bundle theorist is the only reason why I don't label myself a substance dualist. So I agree with the substance dualist almost completely, except when it comes to substance theory. So I don't like substance as understood by Aristotle and Descartes and the whole notion of bare particulars. That doesn't make any sense to me. But if we take that out, I'm basically that kind of dualist.
So probably something that we'll all be wanting to be committed to is a type of mental causation, where we recognize that mental states have some sort of causal feature towards our behaviors, let's say, where like we act on the basis of reasons, and reasons are something that are not going to really be reducible to like facts about the brain chemicals or neurons firing or anything like that. That would be like one type of mental causation. Another one could be like reacting to a hot stove due to the qualia of it being hot, and that like causes me to move my arm. That would be another type of mental causation that might take place. And so I'm curious then, if due to your sort of bundle theory of consciousness, how to sort of fit in causation there? Because, like, I don't know, when I think of properties without some sort of substance that they adhere to, I kind of, I guess it's just a little bit confusing as to like what's the causal sort of source of events, if they're due to reasons or something like that. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So is that the idea there is that if you take on your view, I'm assuming that you accept some kind of substance theory. On your view, there's like an apple, right? And I don't know, it interacts with something causally. You're saying that the substance of the apple sort of like, for lack of a better term, initiates that kind of causal sequence.
Well, probably not for apples, but at least for like agents or subjects that like act on the basis of reasons, they'll be the cause of their actions, rather than like the properties being the cause of their actions.
Everything you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. I think, in fact, I think that if you don't act on reasons, I don't even see why you're an agent. But so I'm right there with you. I guess I'm trying to understand your question. The idea here is that I am a bundle of properties, really, in the sense that I'm a bundle of views. So I have views about the world, and those engage in causal relations much differently, though, than when an apple, how apple would interact with the world.
So how? Yeah. I'm just like, wouldn't there have to be something that the properties are bundled to in order for it to be able to interact with?
Well, then I wouldn't be a bundle theorist, it seems like, anymore, right? I think the idea is that bundle theorists want to like dissociate from this idea that properties are sort of held on to by something else. And my main, maybe I'm quite open, right? Like, to if it's the case that bundle theory is false, then I would just be a substance theorist, no problem, right? But I think my problem with substance is that what I take to be nothing is just there not being any properties. If there are no properties, I think that's indistinguishable from nothing. But on substance theory, there's something left over. If I take an apple and strip away its redness, its meat, its sugar content, and all the properties, then what am I left over? Well, the substance theorist is going to say, well, there's this bare particular, right? That was the thing that was holding on the
right. So, like, as a quasi panpsychist, I would say the intrinsic consciousness, or the subject, the mental subject, would be the concrete source of those properties, or what those properties adhere to or adhere within.
Yeah, I take that to be understood as a bare particular. And so maybe you have, because not all substance theorists posit bare particulars like the older ones didn't. It's more of, I think, I could be wrong, but I think bare particular is somewhat of a new term. I don't think Descartes, or who was a substance theorist, nor did Aristotle posit bare particulars. But the idea is that you have a kind of ontological category that holds on to properties. And so if I were to, you would say that if I were to strip away all these properties from the apple, that eventually you're going to have something left over that was holding together these properties to form the object, or to am I not?
Yeah. I mean, it's similar to, I guess, my criticism of the OSR, the ontic structural realist position, where like all you have are bare relations. It seems to me that similar to that, like, to me, I don't see how you can have like relations of objects without the objects there. Like, in order,
I think there are. I think there are objects, but what objects are is a bundle of properties. So like, I'm a bundle of properties, or I hate calling subjects objects, but an apple is an object in virtue of being a particular bundle of properties. You would say that it's an object, given that there is this bare particular that hold on to a specific set of properties. And really what I'm doing is that I think you and I would pretty much agree on everything, except that you're saying that bare particulars are the necessary condition for there being instantiated properties. I'm saying I'm just getting rid of that language and putting instead this notion of bundle.
Right. I guess it's just sort of weird for me to think about like a bundle, like a property having another property or like being connected to another property without having something doing the connection there, unless like the connection,
I don't know if I
the
can
thing
split
that's
that
doing
way.
the connection is another property, but then that's going to be the same sort of problem, I think.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to what you're saying. I mean, I guess the way I think about it is that it's not like the properties are kind of latched onto other properties. I mean, there are such things as second order properties. I haven't done the research to be very comfortable in like affirming or pointing out issues or strengths of that kind of position where you can have second, third order properties. But I think what I'm trying to say is that if you look at an apple, you have the red skin, you have the stem, right? And perhaps those are we'll just call them properties for simplicity's sake, and they're not really latched on to anything. That rather what makes that I guess an object is that there's this construal that those properties are associated in some kind of way where I'm not positing an extra ontology like a bare particular.
Well, right. So I think I get your argument. I mean, it's very similar to sort of Berkeley's argument for idealism through sort of like, yeah. I think that like what we'd say is that there's the apple that has these properties. And so when we're saying that the apple is red, the red is the property there. But in order to make sense of that property, we have to posit the apple itself having that property.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. That fits within my framework. And so I'm just saying that we can move on. There could be something wrong with bundle theory, right? There could be something that I'm not seeing that you're pointing out.
I gotcha.
I'm just saying that maybe then I should revise my view to some other theory, but it's not going to be substance theory because
you're right. Yeah.
I don't know how to make sense of bare particulars without any properties, because that's, to me, on my understanding, indistinguishable from just nothing, right? If I have nothing here and then an apple with no properties, but there being a bare particular, what's to distinguish that? Because the second that you try to distinguish it, you're appealing to a property.
That might be just an epistemic concern, but even then, I think my original sort of worry was maybe to do with like, okay, I think a problem with property dualism is the worry of Epi Phenomenalism, but the way that you're sort of articulating your property dualism is where what most people would consider substances are really just bundles of properties. And so those bundles of properties do have causal power and are able to interact with the world. It's just differently from how substance theorists would say.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I'm sorry, because when you asked me what kind of dualist I am, I did say, if I were to say that I'm a property dualist, that's misleading, because there are probably good objections to property dualists that don't apply to me, given that I don't, I actually more sympathetic to you. If you are a substance dualist, right, John?
I'm sort of a panpsychist right now. I think that all that exists are mental subjects.
I'm sorry, but the idea is that if you were a substance theorist, I would be much more inclined to accept your view over like the
right, because it's not like you think that there's only physical objects and then there are mental properties along with that. You say that the physical objects are also fully reducible to bundles of properties.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
I think you've understood. Sorry if that was confusing. But yeah, maybe this is a
following Berkeley though. Would you say that physical objects are reducible to mental qualia?
No, I don't. I don't take that strong of a position on qualia. But I do think that what lends credence to the idea that they're non-physical is that there's somebody's qualia. The idea is that physical objects I take to be accessible in a kind of equal manner by all persons of different psychologies or histories. The idea of a qualitative state. It's not like, who said this? You can help me with this, but like, there was some philosopher said, it's not like there can be just pain in the room with no subject, right? The idea is that if there's a pain in the room, it's someone's pain.
Right.
And I think that subject-object distinction is so important to me that if a qualitative state, if there's some qualitative state in the room, I'm associating that with a subject, not an object, right? It's not like the wall's pain. And if it was the wall's pain, then I'm positing a subjectiveness to the wall, and then it would be my dualistic framework would enter, right? The body is the wall, and then there's some kind of transcendental mind or agent.
So it does sound very idealistic then, like either in an objective idealist or a subjective idealist sort of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we'd have to go through that. Like I said, I think that there is, just like with the issue with property dualism, right? We have a certain conception of what property dualists are, but there are variants. And I think there is a variant of idealism that's out there that I would be very, very sympathetic to. I'm just not sure which one that is.
Gotcha, yeah.
Yeah,
Craig,
absolutely.
that's sort of your favorite position, right?
Yeah, definitely. But he's kind of almost identical to where I'm at in terms of, I do believe that there's an objectively verifiable real world, but there's your mental experience of that world is there's an irreducibility to consciousness. Like that's your starting point. And then, how things present in consciousness is different than what things in fact actually are. It's influenced by Schopenhauer and Kant, the phenomena distinction. That's very similar to what he just said, or at least as I heard it.
Right. Yeah, something like that. And I think, John, you kind of remind me of this point. I think there's a kind of sense in which physical objects are irreducible, where they're not reducible to subjectivity. And that's kind of where some versions of idealism I can't accept, right? Because to me, there is really this true dichotomy between subject and object. Subject's not, and in this day and age, everyone wants to take subject. Well, there's actually this kind of object. There's this brain, right? But 300, 200 years ago, whatever, right? Everyone wanted to do the opposite. They want to take object and then reduce, understand in terms of subject. And to me, that's why I'm not immediately accepting idealism, because the sorts of it's really cool. Stoljar's book, when he talks about physicalism, he lays out all these arguments against physicalism, right? And then towards his conclusion, right, in the very end of the book, he basically paints the exact same arguments towards these subjective idealists, right? That, hey, because you're going the other direction, right? You're going, so there's a lot of the same concerns that arise from this like kind of radical,
right? I don't know if you've been checking out Donald Hoffman at all, and there's the other guy, Anil Seth, who Emerson might know. But there's basically an object-based ontology to a thing, which is its material substance, intrinsic to it. And then there is the context-based ontology, part of which would be your experience of that. For example, colors. Colors are not intrinsic to the object himself. So there are things that you are actually giving to an object it's like a fiction that we're presenting to ourselves. Now that's basically just a fact. I see that fact as totally consistent with idealism, but then there are other idealists who are arguing that there's, the entire real world isn't really there. It's a mental construct. And, that's obviously not true as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Yeah. Looks like we're on the same wavelength, right?
I would think so.
We have the same brain state.
I get what you're saying, though, Danny, that you want to sort of retain a clear distinction between the subject and the object, and you want to make that an ontological distinction rather than just an epistemic distinction.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I was trying to understand why you invoked epistemic distinction. I guess maybe you could elaborate
Well, because like Emerson and I are sort of neutral monists in a sense, where what appears to be only objects is really a subject. It's just that from our epistemic standpoint, we don't have access to what it's like to be that thing.
Right.
But we do have epistemic access to our own internal sort of states. And so, and we know that we appear to be an object to other subjects. And so that's what gives us a reason to think that, well, yeah, like an object is just a subject from the outside.
That's exactly where I can't get on the panpsychist train, right? It's just I can't make sense of a mental object because I take mentality to be namely subjective. And so maybe y'all could help me.
Do you mean an object that has like properties of consciousness to it? Is that how you're?
Yeah, the idea is that consciousness, mentality, these are what I, in my mind, understand as very subjective entities. And so when someone says, hey guys, there's mental objects out there, then suddenly, given that I give that really, really strict dichotomy, where you're there, the subject is kind of jumping on the other side, and then I get confused, right? I just think that if we're talking about objects, we're talking about things that are namely not subjective. I take mentality, consciousness to be subjective entities, hence why I'm not a panpsychist.
Right.
No, I completely agree with you, but that's part of my motivation for, rejecting physicalism. Like Thomas Nagel wrote this essay called Objective and Subjective that I think makes the same point really, really well, where it's like, no, these things are irreducibly distinct. Like you're not going to be able to cross the dividing line between objective and subjective. Like you might as well try to cross the dividing line between abstract and concrete. Like if we just put enough abstract objects together in just the right way, then we'll get a concrete. Like that's nonsense. And like I kind of feel the same way about objects. Like if you just put enough objective description, in just the right way, eventually this will somehow be alchemized into a subjective description. It's like, no, this is just a brute intuition I have that those things are distinct, but I can give arguments for why I think they actually are distinct, but I don't think I have to do that now. But no, the what I call dual aspect monism, which is what most people call dual aspect monism, everyone except Bernardo Kastrup, who has his own special definition of this, which I'm fine with. But, I just mean that, yes, object and subject are irreducibly distinct, but you can, if you like, you can conceive of these things as two sides of the same coin, where what there really is consciousness, and the way consciousness appears to other subjects is as an object. So I'm a mental being. That's what I am first and foremost. I'm a conscious creature. But the way I appear to you is not really as a conscious creature. Like you kind of intuit that I'm a conscious creature, but you don't have access to my mental states like I have access to my mental states. So the way that I conceive of the mind-brain relation is that there's really only one substance here, but there's only you don't like substances, but there's only one stuff here. And then there's this epistemic dualism where if you are the thing in itself, then you're this mental thing. But if you're a thing in itself, observing this other thing in itself, it's this appearance of another thing. That's when you get this sort of illusion of matter. So I start sounding like an idealist here because because I think everything is mental, but the thing is like matter is really, really real. We just have a confused idea about what it is in and of itself. So I think panpsychism and idealism are kind of compatible, but the thing is, I agree with you that subject and object are like these irreducibly distinct things. But I think that you can, and there might be some motivation for this, but it's certainly coherent that you can conceive of these things as two sides of the same coin, as an ontological monism with an epistemic dualism. So that's what I tend to call dual aspect monism. That's how I'm using the term, at least.
Yeah, a lot of what you're saying is resonating with me. Like I'm on board with a lot of what you're saying. Earlier, I said I am skeptical of ontologies that say everything is X, and you said everything is mental. And my concern there is that it renders something like the word mental vacuous, right? And I actually briefly spoke with Peter Van Inwagen about this. Van Inwagen does some really good work on problems with mono-ontological views where you think that everything is one kind of ontology. Right. And I asked,
Isn't Van Inwagen a physicalist?
What? Yes. Well, he's a physicalist, I think, with respect to human minds. Right. I think he is a Platonist. I don't think he thinks God's mind is physical. Right. So, yeah, but
right, physicalist meaning he thinks that your brain is just causing consciousness.
I got you though. But
can I just interject and say that, like, I would agree with you that if you're going to start saying everything is X, then that is just bound to be meaningless. Except unless you say everything is this thing that we have this direct acquaintance with, so we just know what it is. It's the one exception, I think, to that rule that you're outlining, where it's like we know experience just by being. Like I accept the revelation thesis. I think we know something about experience by being experiencers. We have some kind of special access to what that is. So when I say everything is experience, you have to do some philosophical work to understand what I mean. But you can't say experience is vacuous because you are a conscious creature. So it's not vacuous to say everything is mind stuff.
Well, I'm certainly that I'm still trying to understand the view. It seems like you are really utilizing the ontology epistemic. Basically, some of the issues that are raised in the way that we know things, right? For you really factors into how you see the world. And I think you're utilizing that in a way where I'm not totally, I'm still trying to understand. So do you think that if a thing exists, right, that itself establishes that a mental thing exists? Oh, okay. So that's what comes in my mind when someone says everything is mental is that if there's a thing, it's mental.
Well, oh, sorry. I thought you were asking me, like, can I conceive of a world where, like, mentation doesn't exist? Did I misunderstand?
I'm sorry. Maybe I guess the question was, if a thing exists, is it mental? Is that true? Do you accept that?
Like, in our world?
In any world.
Well, I wouldn't make a claim about, all possible worlds. I'm just saying that I think that I have reasons for being a panpsychist, and these reasons lead me to think that, concrete physical reality has this kind of dual aspect character to it.
Okay, so I guess I'm still so it seems like you would say no, that if a thing exists, it could be mental or otherwise.
Well, I just I'm listening closely to you where you say like it could be, and it's like, well, I can certainly conceive of it not being mental. I just happen to think it is.
Okay, then it seems like what your view about panpsychism is a contingent view.
Well, I think we need to clarify whether we're talking about a metaphysical could or just could in the it's conceivable sort of sense.
Well,
Yeah, when I do could, I mean
in
logical.
some
Right.
possible
Does he mean
world.
could like actually could be, or
I mean
could in
logical
all
possibility.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Logical possibility.
I mean, I can imagine a world where physicalism is true. I mean, I don't think consciousness would exist in that world, but I mean,
see, I think that there are no worlds. I think I think physicalism is impossible, logically speaking.
Oh, that's a much stronger view than I have. I just think it happens to not be true.
Right, given the existence of necessary objects like abstracta.
Well, see, that's why when I mentioned so maybe how you're defining physicalism, but the way I defined it was like every concrete thing is physical. So you could be a Platonist and a physicalist on my kind of more liberal view.
Yeah, you did say that earlier. Now I remember. So I guess.
So you still say abstract objects exist? Is that what you're saying, Emerson Green?
I don't know. I'm agnostic. I'm saying I know a physicalist who's rather philosophically inclined, named
And he's a
Shane,
Platonist in the sense of like he thinks. Actually, isn't
so,
Thomas Nagel kind of a Platonist in terms of?
Is Thomas Nagel a Platonist? I don't know. I'm just saying that
I don't know.
I know a physicalist who at least says that physicalism is compatible with Platonism, and that makes sense to me because I take physicalism to be a thesis about the concrete.
Right.
World.
Well, Tariq, he's a eliminative materialist, and he's also a Platonist.
Well, they're one of the most famous. Quine,
yeah.
Platonist, right? And a naturalist. Or I think that maybe you said you distinguish naturalism and physicalism.
Yeah, I consider myself a naturalist, and I'm not a physicalist.
Okay, is that well? That now I'm sufficiently.
It's not an unusual use of the term. I mean, David Chalmers, naturalistic dualism. Galen Strawson calls
doesn't
himself
make
a
any sense
naturalist.
to me.
Thomas Nagel calls himself a
they must be using the
naturalist.
terms differently, right? They have to be using the terms differently.
I think they're using it in like a straightforward way, the same way that like Sean Carroll, who's just a physicist, who I mean, he defines naturalism as the view that there's only one world, the natural world, and that science tells us about the laws that govern the natural world. And it's like that's totally compatible with non-physical.
Yeah, but that's not very informative to me. If everything,
you're right, it's not very informative, but it's a good like starting point.
It seems like it is the starting point for sure, right? I mean, I don't know. I just don't really. I have really I might have non-standard conceptions of natural and physical and material, but I don't know what these people are talking about when they're saying that I'm a naturalist, dualist, or I accept.
But why do you think that? I mean, there seems to be a weird view in the background there. If you're saying that like dualists can't be naturalists or whatever, it seems to be some kind of like implicit concession that consciousness and natural, there's some kind of tension.
Yeah, I think there's a contradiction, a flat out contradiction. I think that
I just don't see that.
Well, because I take that which is natural, I understand in terms of causal tendency and dispositions. So that's to say that like a physical thing or a natural thing has a disposition in terms of its causal role in the world. So like take solubility. Okay, salt is soluble when it enters water. It's just disposed to dissolving in the water. The Earth is disposed to revolving around the sun, and we could further understand these in terms of law-like causation. Law-like causation. But you see, I think mental events, when they cause other mental events, this is non-law-like. This has to be a non-law-like.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I was about to mention that, like, I got distracted from the question John asked like a while ago about mental causation and Epi Phenomenalism. So like I believe in, you know, like, so phenomenal realism is really high on the list of non-negotiable things. Actually, it might be number one for me. Realism about phenomenal consciousness is.
You mean phenomenalism, or is that something different?
No, just realism about phenomenal consciousness.
Okay.
So like that's probably the most non-negotiable belief I have, and I think mental causation is easily in the top 5, maybe number 2 there, of just like, you know, I just reject epiphenomenalism as a datum. So if you have some kind of view that leads to epiphenomenalism or whatever, it's just like, okay, well, I know that's wrong because I know that there's mental causation.
Yeah,
so,
I'm right there with you. Yeah.
So, and I actually have a couple arguments.
Can you guys define epiphenomenalism so people understand what you mean?
It's just the view that the, you know, valence of your experiences, you know, your mental events have no causal efficacy over the physical world. So the feeling of pain has nothing to do with you being like running away from pain or recoiling from pain. Like the actual experience of pain, that's not the reason that you're getting away from this like negative stimulus, which is a really weird view.
Yeah, the way I like to understand epiphenomenalism is in terms of when you're playing a video game and you have to take care of your nephew who's like 5 years old, you give him a controller, right? Mm-hmm. And then they take the controller and they mash all the buttons and they look at the screen and they think that their decisions are causally efficacious to what's going on in the video game, but it's not.
Yeah.
So that's how I think of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that view I just take to be ruled out. But, you know, it's interesting because a lot of people who aren't really philosophically inclined will call themselves, they're like, I'm a physicalist and an epiphenomenalist. And it's like, I think when you flesh out epiphenomenalism, it's like some kind of dualistic view because you're saying first there's the physical events and then there are the mental events. And one of them has causal efficacy and the other one doesn't. So like there is some kind of like, this must be some kind of dualism. So anyway, just a lot of, I've noticed.
It seems like it rests well with like a dualism. I think I see, because I don't know what it would mean to say that they're physical objects with no causal tendency, or at least rather they're just merely effects and they can't be causes. It does seem like those are like weird dualists. They're like my weird cousins and I don't talk to them, but
it's like how people, a lot of atheists will say, oh, emergent property of the brain, and they think that just explains everything, and you're like, okay, it doesn't really tell us anything.
The word emergent there is doing quite a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah, like a ton.
But going back to,
I was trying to finish the point about mental causation. So like, I'm a hardcore believer in mental causation. So the thing is, like, I kind of so you just outlined a view I think that some people find more commonsensical, but I really don't see the conflict between the mental and kind of law-like behavior, even like necessitation. So I'm more like with Spinoza, who thinks that like there can be like even necessitarianism or determinism with like a mind-only world, and that just makes perfect sense to me.
It does not make any sense to me, but
yeah,
but let's discuss it.
So I mean, I was just mentioning this because I'm more inclined towards determinism. But I also think there's nothing but consciousness. Some people find that strange. I don't think it's strange in the slightest.
I'm there with you. Okay, so we agree on that. I'm a determinist, but I'm a compatibilist. So I take
we're getting up on John now. There's two.
After this, we got to go back. We're going to go for John, and then once we take him out, we're going to take over the stream. Sorry, Craig.
Dude, John smoked 4 atheists in one sitting for like 3 straight hours.
John, if you ever get,
I've done it before.
If you ever need air support, because a lot of these atheists, just like, ugh, so if you ever need air support, let me know, okay?
He can't be defeated because he doesn't seem to like register. Like people will be saying that makes no sense, and they're shouting at him in the comments. It doesn't.
I want to see this. Where does this happen, John? I really want to see this.
I'll show it to you. It happened on JB's channel, right? It was like 4 straight hours of
Pine
7-on-1.
Was grilling me.
Oh, really? Oh, Pine Creek. I have a little skirmish with him on my channel. But anyways, it was about.
Yeah, go ahead.
But anyways, I think that I take a very, I don't think I want to call it fringe, but no one construes intentionality the way that I do, at least on the people that I met here on YouTube. I think intentionality, intentional states, not qualitative states, mind you, are normative states. They basically express oughts. And the thing is, my construal of normativity is that there are no laws of oughts. There are no laws about, the idea is that if I should do X, that doesn't predict anything about how the world is, given that we're expressing how the world should be. So if I find something good, or if I desire something, or if I believe something, it's an expression of how I want the world to be, or what might be true.
But you are a determinist, though, in regards to human action, right?
Right. The idea is that it is causally efficacious, but it's not going to be some further fact like a law that explains the causation between A and B. So
it'll be the mental subject.
Right. So my desire for water, and that causes me to raise the glass of water. I think that when someone asks me, why did you behave that way? Why did you grab something to drink? I'm going to say, it's because I desired water. I found it valuable to drink. And the idea, there's two things there. Number one, that it's because it's normative, there are no laws of the normative. And the second thing is that if I do appeal to a law that explains the interaction between my desire and my behavior, then really my reason does not explain my behavior. And that destroys free will, even on a determinist picture, because our reasons are not what explain our behaviors. It's these laws, right? And our deliberative processes sort of necessarily entail the possibility of all these outcomes, but if there are laws about all this stuff, there's only one possible outcome, right? And so that's why I can, if I construe naturalism in terms of objects that have dispositions that are understood in terms of natural laws, the way that mental intentionality works is not in that way, so it can't be natural.
I mean, I think if you introspect, you might find that it does kind of work that way. Like there are always these reasons. Like, so I buy into some kind of PSR, and I think that that applies also to the mental world, where there's always some reason that you do something or believe something or feel something. And especially when it comes to valenced experiences, like the hedonically charged experiences, it seems like things are just very intelligibly ordered here. And I see no reason to say that that's not law-like, or especially if you imagine something that's much, much simpler than us and doesn't really have reflective capacities or rational capacities. It's just kind of this, dumb instinctual thing that's just being pushed around by stimuli. It's like, yeah, why couldn't be? So I kind of tie this into, some stuff about the philosophy of science that I view to be pretty non-controversial. Some people push back on it, but I don't really see the problem with it, where it's like, science is about what stuff does, not what stuff is. It's a description of behavior. It's a description, science provides us with descriptions of what physical reality will do under certain conditions and how to manipulate it. And
making predictions based on observations, and it's not really telling us anything about what things actually are.
Yeah, it has to do with observation and prediction and experiment. And it's like but I think there are things that go beyond observation and experiment. And I think most people do, if they think about it. So I think that this sort of abstract behavioral description that science provides us with, which allows us to do all this engineering, all this, we can make technology that works, it's all based on science. But the thing is, science doesn't tell us what stuff is. So this abstract description of behavior, it could, if we're talking about little particles over there, this abstract behavioral description could be describing the behavior of little drops of experience, or it could be describing the behavior of some concrete non-experiential stuff. But the thing is, to say either one is some kind of metaphysical step beyond what can be empirically confirmed or disconfirmed. It's a metaphysical view either way. If you want to say that physics is describing something that is non-experiential, or physics is describing the behavior of something that is experiential, that's a step beyond what the physics is in fact saying. It's a metaphysical view. So, I just don't see any reason to rule out.
Most of the scientists have implicit metaphysical views baked into their like Soren Carroll, for example, strict physicalist, and he thinks it's because the physics tells him that, but he's actually extrapolating a metaphysical view that's not necessarily having anything to do with the observations of the physics.
Correct. That's right. Yeah.
Right,
So
that's what I thought you meant.
But it's not just based on some kind of like dogmatic, religious conviction with regards to physicalism. It's just the intuitive view. Like our theory of mind doesn't kick in when we're just looking at inanimate particles. It seems like, well, you'd have to give me a reason to say that it's that it's experiential in nature as opposed to non-experiential. But my point is just that you should be agnostic about that question until you have reason to think otherwise. But it is kind of the intuitive view. But the thing is, if panpsychism is true, the thing that science is talking about when we're describing particles, it's so simple and unreflective and instinctual that I see no reason why these kind of law-like regularities couldn't apply to conscious subjects, provided that they're very simple conscious subjects who are just kind of being pushed around by stimuli.
Well, I gave you a reason that intentional states are normative states. That's the first problem. And in terms of your PSR point, right?
Wait. That's not a problem, that they're intentional states. I mean, I don't know if intention. I don't conflate intentionality and phenomenal consciousness. Like, I don't think that those are exactly. Do you think
intentional states are normative states?
I don't exactly know what you mean by that. I mean, I think that normativity is intimately connected with intentionality and phenomenality.
Not just connected, that is constitutive of normativity.
I don't know, maybe.
Well, but then you see that's part of my argument, that if it is, then you have a problem with respect to laws, right? And going back to your PSR, my view is compatible with the PSR. Look, the idea is that I grabbed my Coke. Why did I grab my Coke? I wanted to make a point to Emerson. Why did I want to make a point to Emerson? Because of some antecedent set of conditions that had to do with Craig Reed and all this other stuff, right? There's a law of causation. What I'm not invoking in that line of causation are laws of the mental, laws of the normative, laws of reasons. I don't think those things exist, right? If you ask, right, why does the sun revolve around the earth? Wow, I just gave a geocentrist thing. Why is the earth flat? Why does the earth revolve around the sun? Why does the earth revolve in the sun? Why is salt soluble? That stuff, right, is going to be understood in terms of eventual laws of nature, chemistry, and scientific findings. And so they're going to appeal to that fundamentally. So I'm saying that the PSR is compatible with both. I
buy into a pretty strong PSR.
There was one more thing I wanted to say, other than when we go back to the normative thing. This normative thing is very important to me. John is a libertarian. You accept libertarian free will, right? So this is what I think libertarian free will is kind of crazy, but they get one thing right, okay? They get one thing right that the most compatibilists never get right, that the future is open, right? The idea is that when I am deliberating, I'm deliberating about what I should do in the future, and it comes with the belief that the future is open to what I end up deciding to do, okay? And the idea is that there are laws governing all these causal connections all the way to the future, right? Then my deliberative process plays no role in any kind of outcome, right? It's actually just these laws. The libertarians have it right here. They really do. And I learned from them, right? So I think that it's in conjunction with those intentional states being normative is one of the reasons why I can't be a naturalist.
What if there's like certain laws about human behavior where humans, when they're like inclined towards good, like, I don't know, laws of the market or something like that, like supply and demand, that will have some sort of like normative aspects to it, but it's still going to be able to predict human behavior in a quasi-law-like fashion.
Well, yeah, and actually, even David Chalmers speculates that there are laws of consciousness that we don't know that like people exactly fall into behavior patterns based on a law that we it looks like it's something that isn't a law, but it is. Go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
I made Emerson stop talking, so I kind of want him to because I said I wanted to
I
finish.
think he went to go
Dude, you
grab.
crushed
there
him.
it is.
There's no. You crushed him.
Yeah, but I
That's
cut
why
him off, and I feel bad. He needs to be a free spirit. So I don't want to violate his will.
yeah, we need to be more gentle with Emerson. I
I
agree.
had to use a bathroom.
You were saying something before I asked to finish, and I was interested in what you were saying.
Well, just off the top of my head, what you were saying, like, I think that I might buy into like a stronger PSR than you do. I mean, I buy into so that might be a relevant distinction.
Okay.
But there was one thing that you said about how I'm tempted just to go down the free will route because it's an interesting thing in and of itself. But like you said, future is open. And in one sense, I agree with you because we don't know what the future is. So the future is open because we have no idea what it is. But I am a determinist, though. So in another sense, the future is not open. But I don't think that means that our deliberations play no role. I think our deliberations are a part of the causal chain that leads to things being the way they are. So you should believe the future is open because, one, epistemically, we have no idea what the future is going to be. And secondly, because our deliberations determine what the future will be. So it's just insane to think that the future is fixed and your deliberations make no difference because they do make a difference.
Nature determine the future, then it's
not. I think the laws of nature are descriptions of what conscious creatures are doing.
Right, but the idea is that they are non-causal explanations for the future, right? The idea is that if I have a mass and an acceleration, right, I can plug those in and get a force, right? I'm appealing to that law in order to make predictions. Now, I think to what John said earlier, the laws of psychology, laws of the mental, laws of economic supply and demand, I don't take these to be laws in the sense like strict laws, right? The idea is that
economics is fake, so for sure not.
Yeah, well, the idea there is that it's not going to violate some kind of like there are people that frequently, in terms of the economic stuff, you can introduce all sorts of other variables that will radically change the way that people buy things and sell things, right? And
like Bitcoin.
I guess the way it would look, I'm making a prediction that John will not curse me out during this.
Wrong again.
I'm making a prediction that John will not.
I was considering just like laying out an F-bomb, but like in order to comply with your prediction, I'll refrain.
You can make predictions without laws, is what I'm trying to say. I'm predicting that John won't curse me out now. I'm predicting that he'll never curse me out in the future. Right? It seems like we're very, given,
the night is still young, Danny.
but, I mean, we make predictions about, if I market this thing this way, or if I keep.
But there are laws and principles undergirding those predictions. They aren't random. Even the one with John, there you could tie that into like standards of behavior and decency that John has habitually behaved. He acts crazy and weird only in the privacy of his own home when nobody's watching. Then he does really weird things. But in public, he won't do such because of norms of behavior. So you can predicate that on things that are pretty close to laws, I would say.
Well, okay, pretty close to laws, I'm fine with. It's pretty close that most people, don't want to eat, nasty stuff like, feces, right? But it's not a law, right? So the point is that when you said you invoked the word random, I don't think it's random. I think there's this distinction of causation between singular causation and law-like causation. A case of singular causation is a case where I invoke my reason, right? So I said, why did you drink the Coke? Well, because I had I desire to drink the Coke. Okay, why do I have desire? Because of some physiological state of my body. Well, why was there that particular physiology? Because I refused to drink stuff an hour ago, right? And that's none of that is random. But what I'm not invoking is laws of thirst, laws of reasons, right? Where when it comes to physical things like the Earth revolving around the sun, right? Eventually,
right. I see what you're getting at. Yeah, there's a distinction there.
The idea is that laws are about necessity. They keep the
laws are inviolate and they don't change.
If determinism is true, then having a full understanding of all facts at one moment in time will entail that only one specific future state of affairs will occur. And so like you could say that's like, yeah, you could say that's not a law that like forces that to occur. It's rather the choices and decisions of mental subjects acting due to reasons and things like that. And I don't know if there's really going to be much of a disagreement between you and Emerson, because the way that he was sort of talking about laws as like just a description of what the universe does, and like there are subjects within the universe. In fact, the whole universe is made up out of subjects. It's just able to be sort of described purely law in a purely law-like fashion, I guess. I don't know.
Well,
I'm just
let me say two things that I think might clarify like where I'm coming from in this. The first thing is just that a sufficiently strong PSR will lead to modal collapse. So a sufficiently, I think that's pretty uncontroversial. A sufficiently strong principle of sufficient reason will lead to modal collapse. That's true even if panpsychism is true, I think. So the second thing is that just because there's this distinction between the way things are and the way they ought to be, I don't think that bears on the how I would express my view is that experiences necessitate their effects. So the fact that you feel this extremely negative stimulus, and it gets complicated up here because we're very complicated, probably the most complicated conscious creatures that we know of. And it's like, you know, so it's more complicated with
particularly us in this call right now, actually.
I was referring to me specifically. No, like, so, but you can imagine simpler subjects. But anyway, the point is, I think that experiences necessitate their effects. So like if you have a sufficiently negative stimulus, then you will want less of that and you'll try to get away from that. And like, I don't think that there's, in the absence of other influences, I think that that's just completely unavoidable. So, and I think that you can introspect and see this truth. It's not even that speculative. So I think that experiences necessitate their effects, and the fact that there's some kind of distinction between the way things are and the way they ought to be doesn't really bear on that claim.
Yeah, okay, so this comes down to the norm, whether mental states or specifically intentional states are normative states. And the reason why is because what I take a normative state to be is a standard in which makes failure or success possible. Okay. And the idea is that failure and success, given that they're mutually exclusive, if those are both possible, there can't be laws about normativity, right? Because if there is a law between what one ought do and the outcome of, well, based on that particular state, then one of the whether that be success or failure will not be possible, and it thus won't be a normative state. So the idea is that if normativity creates the possibility of success or failure, that's to say, if it's true that I ought be muted, right? That entails that if I am muted, there's success. If I'm not muted, there's failure with respect to the norm. If that is built into the very notion of belief and desire, then it's going to follow that that when we desire something, that the possibility of success or failure will be there. But if there are laws of desires, that means that one of the outcomes won't be possible given the law.
Is this sort of like the ought implies can principle that like
yes. I mean,
I'm quite familiar with it, because that's a crucial element to my argument for libertarian freedom, is that like if I had ought to do something and I end up doing otherwise, well, then that means I could have done otherwise, which is
yes, that means there can't be laws. There can't be laws about it, right? Because
but that's why I reject determinism.
Okay, well, you and I accept part of your libertarian free will shenanigans, but the idea here, we'll talk about that later, but the idea here is that where John and I agree is that if I desired water, I could have desired Coca-Cola, which is actually the case. If I desired Coke, I could have desired otherwise. But if there were laws of the mental, that would have not been possible. That's not possible because when I drank Coke, there were laws governing that deliberative process such that it would not have been possible in the other world.
So, I mean, the basic claim was just...
the
basic claim was just experiences necessitate their effects, and being able to imagine a world that's better than this world or worse than this world just has no bearing on that question. Like whether or not the negative valence of your hedonic state causes you to want less of that.
Do you think you could have not been on the stream? Do you think you could have done otherwise?
He couldn't have. John and I would have killed him.
Do you think you could have done otherwise, Emerson?
Do you want to go down this road?
Look, the point is that if you think that you could have at any point when you say I made a mistake, right? You are saying that I should have done I should have done otherwise. If ought implies can, that means you could have done otherwise. But laws crap all over that, right?
See, the thing is, me and John have argued about this for a collective 47,000 hours.
Oh, okay. John, I shouldn't go further, right? I mean, but John, you agree with me, right? You know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
John
but
agrees with
I
you.
think inconsistent with determinism. So we'll have
No.
to talk about that
Okay, well, we'll put
Yeah,
let's
see,
put
you're
that
in
in
this
garbage
weird
can,
middle
right?
position. You're like somewhere between me and John right now. So, yeah.
We should
Yeah,
both gang up on him.
The standard forms of compatibilism have something going for them, and then I think libertarian free will. I took the best parts of y'all's views, right? This is what
Made it
happened,
incoherent. Right? Yeah, it's great. All right, we've gone an hour and 30 minutes. I was thinking we could either stop now, or if we wanted to, maybe go over somewhat the argument from vagueness.
Do you know the vagueness argument, Danny?
No, you're gonna have to go over that for me.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
That'd be a good place
say
to
what you
finish
think
up
about
with.
it. So, like I said, this is the argument that apparently convinced Michael Tai, who's like a famous physicalist philosopher until recently. But it's something that, like, it wasn't when I first became a non-physicalist. I was making these kind of anti-emergence arguments where I was like, okay, phenomenal consciousness is this ontologically weighty thing. Like when phenomenal consciousness appears in history, it's this non-redundant addition to the inventory of reality. It's not just a different way of talking about the same stuff that's always been there, which is ultimately why I had to reject reductive physicalism. So, but the thing is, when I started kind of untangling the arguments I was making, it was like, oh, I'm actually making a few different arguments here. So one of those arguments was the vagueness argument, which can itself be separated into two different strands. So the main one has to do with, like Leibniz's law and like identifying these two things that are discernible. So the idea is basically like there are no conceivable borderline cases of phenomenal consciousness. Like it's either present or it's not. It's either like something or it's not. It's not something that admits of borderline cases. So we can spend more time on that if need be. But I take it as something that's just you either see it or you don't. It's not really something that
it's either there or it isn't.
Yeah, it's not like a heap of sand or a beard or something.
Right, it's a true dichotomy.
Yeah. So, and we know it exists. So that's weird. So anyway, so just put that in our back pocket for a second. So this thing that really exists doesn't admit of borderline cases. So we take that, and then some people, physicalists, try to identify it with neural states, with brain states. The thing is, brain states admit of borderline cases. Like neural states are vague. They're not precise or sharp in the way that phenomenal consciousness is. Okay. So you're trying to identify phenomenal consciousness with this thing that it can't be identified with. So you have, this precise phenomenon, not necessarily natural phenomenon, given how you use the term, but it's like you've got this precise thing that we know exists, this sharp thing, and people are trying to identify it with neural states, which we know admit of borderline cases. They're vague. And so, yeah, there are different ways of kind of fleshing out that argument. That's like a very shorthand account. So that's the one strand of vagueness arguments. The other strand has to do, this is like how Philip Goff argues for it. It's more of an arbitrariness argument. So the point is like, okay, let's just say it is sharp. It is this precise thing. That means it emerged at some specific point in, say, like fetal development. So, there's this fetus, it's developing, it's growing. And then at some point it becomes conscious. So it had to be this precise moment. It was this sharp moment. There was this particulate change, this very tiny change in physical nature. And then there was this dramatic change in terms of like, it's not like anything. It's not even blackness. And then all of a sudden it's like something. So this tiny change accounts for somehow this dramatic change in nature. And the point is, you're going to have to pick a place in this development for when this dramatic change occurred, and any point you pick is going to feel arbitrary. So let's just say it's identified with neural states. that means that, you know, so let's just say it's at like, you know, 6,057 neurons. That's when the lights flip on. It becomes like something to be. And it's like, okay, well, why wasn't it like one neuron less? Why wasn't it like one nerve cell more?
Right.
You know,
That's
so
similar
the
to-
whole spirit of like reductive physicalism is like, this is supposed to make sense. There's supposed to be this intelligible reduction of phenomenal consciousness to physical states. But you have these two problems, according to the vagueness argument. For one, you're trying to identify this precise phenomenon with this vague phenomenon. So, like, that's one problem. The other problem is just arbitrariness. No matter which point you pick, it's going to feel completely arbitrary that you picked that point and not a little bit before or a little bit after. And that's completely against the spirit, if not the letter, of reductive materialism. So those are like, that's like a 10,000-foot view of like the two expressions of vague. So these vagueness arguments, they don't lead you to panpsychism. They just lead you away from physicalism. So you could take the vagueness argument to be an argument for dualism. You could take it to be an argument for panpsychism. But the point is that physicalism is out.
Yeah, I wonder, I'm going to be the physicalist now and try to push back. Do you think that water is H2O?
It's reducible to it, though.
Yeah, I think that water is, so I think that H2O is a perfect example. I mean, like, I'll let you finish your argument.
No.
Yeah.
I think you know where I'm going with this. So I just want to know the sort of response that you would give to a physicalist who thought that, because the idea is that, and water is not the best example. You can take something like insulin and the chemical formula for insulin, right? That if you didn't have that, if you removed one bond or one carbon away from the insulin, the whole thing could change. In the same way that, you have these hydrogens and the oxygens, and then they come together in form of something with really radically different properties. And yeah, all you have to do is take away one proton and it's done, right? It's no longer that thing. So I was wondering how you would respond to that.
Yeah. So the argument is not that. See, let me just take a step back. When I first kind of reinvented the wheel of this argument, like I kind of invented it on my own, and then, as it often happens in philosophy, you're like, oh, 100 million other people have also made this same exact argument. But so I kind of had this particular way of formulating the argument where I basically thought that I had disproven physicalism for all of 6 hours. And then I realized, this objection that you're making now kind of occurred to me. And then I fell into a deep depression, realizing that I hadn't disproven physicalism. But the point is just that there are these examples of sharpness and precision in nature that are just purely physical, right? Like the examples that you give. But the point here is that we're trying to identify consciousness with neural states. So we're not trying to identify consciousness with H2O or with insulin. We're trying to identify it with a brain, and brains admit of borderline cases. So maybe you can point to these very tiny things that exist in nature, like an atom, and you say well, I remove this one subatomic particle, and there is this sharp distinction between an atom and not an atom. So that's debatable. I'm just trying to concede for the physicalist's sake that there are examples of precision in nature that are fully physical. Okay, but the point is, we're talking about the biological world. Physicalists think that, consciousness is identified with brain states and with neural states, not with these subatomic level phenomena. We're talking about biology, which is very messy and very vague. So given the fact that they're trying to identify things, they're trying to identify something that does not admit of borderline cases with something that does admit of borderline cases. That's the problem. So the fact that we're up here in the highly, the highly emergent biological realm where things are vague and messy, and not down here in the subatomic realm where there's arguably more precision. That's a relevant, point. But, your point is well taken that there are sharp and precise things in the physical world.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I think that, I think for me, at least, if I were a physicalist at best, this would push me into some kind of agnostic position at best, right? Where, okay, maybe, I need to really think about this, but I don't, then I think I would just ask. So
there are additional steps to get you to another view, but this is just the first step of being oh, physicalism is wrong. But it is funny though, when I have presented this argument, that's how it tends to go. They're just like, I guess I'll have to think about that more, or they do kind of like fall into this like agnostic position. But the thing is, there are like 2 or 3 more steps if you want to get into dualism or panpsychism.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm not giving you the time to do justice to the argument, but I think the point is that given my kind of approach to philosophy, I'm looking for, is there a contradiction in my view? Because if my view is something like a mental state could in principle be a brain state, then that's just to say that for all I know, they're identical. And I'm looking for a reason to think that I ought not believe that.
Well, doesn't the vagueness argument give you that, though, given that these things admit of borderline cases, neural states, but that phenomenal states don't admit of borderline cases?
I'm not going to be so quick to say that it doesn't, because I need to take time to understand the argument, which I don't think I have taken that much time to understand the argument. There might be something
for those who are interested, just who might be listening, so Michael Ty just published this book. I think it was called Evolution and Vagueness, or something like that. It's a new book, but anyway, he, like, in the introduction, he kind of outlines this vagueness argument, and I found that to be a pretty nice little summary. Just for
how are you spelling his last name?
I'm sorry, Craig, go ahead.
How are you spelling his last name?
Oh, T-Y-E, Michael Ty.
T-Y-E. Okay.
Yeah.
What it reminds me of is the sorts of arguments that that have to do with at what point are you a person, where like, if I cut off your finger, are you still you? If I cut off your hand, are you still you? At what point, at what point what do I have to do to your body to where you're no longer you? And it
right.
seems
Where's
like,
where is it irreducible? Where is it
right? Not? Yeah. And I feel like that has to do with what you're saying. Maybe not, but I think those are some. At the very least, if the argument is not good, it's at least a pretty good intuition pump. But I have to take time to understand the argument.
Yeah, no, there's a really interesting expression of the vagueness argument by the philosopher named Hunter Ash. I actually posted it on my channel, or maybe my personal channel. But his like starting premise is just like, look, phenomenal consciousness is really, really real. Like, it's kind of more real than other stuff we call real. And like that, so he's kind of anticipating a couple potential objections just by being like, okay, let's start with just reflecting on the nature of phenomenal consciousness and how it has a different ontological status than that of a table or these other things that are, you could chalk up to just convenient ways of talking about the world. But yeah, no, I think it's an interesting argument. And the objections I've heard to it are just shockingly bad. Like some of them, like they'll throw you for a loop for a second, but like, the argument from vagueness can go something like, premise 1, physicalism entails that there are borderline states of phenomenal consciousness because, phenomenal consciousness is identified as brain states and brain states admit of borderline cases. So physicalism entails that there should be borderline cases of phenomenal consciousness. Premise 2, we can't even conceive of what a borderline case of phenomenal consciousness would be.
There's no such thing as an almost consciousness or an almost. Yeah. It's either on or off. The lights are on or off.
And so I've seen 2 physicalists now who they concede both premise 1 and premise 2, and yet they remain physicalists because they think, yes, we can't even conceive of borderline cases of phenomenal consciousness. And yes, physicalism entails that there should be such a thing, but that doesn't matter because of all these really complicated reasons that and it's just like,
I don't know. I'm kind of sympathetic with them if and only if they have an argument for physicalism. So
well, their argument is that physicalism is true because there's so much evidence for it.
Well, yeah, but those are like unsophisticated physicalists. But like I'm talking about like people that try to forward causal closure arguments, and or arguments why dualism isn't coherent. That kind of if dualism isn't coherent, then physicalism.
Let me ask you this: how open are you to like full on like substance dualism, like fucking ghosts are real, and like just hardcore substance dualism? We can separate.
I'm basically
rejoin our cult, Danny. Be Christian.
But I'm basically
Jesus loves you, Danny.
Jesus loves you, Danny.
I'm basically am a substance dualist. I just take substance theory out. So I don't think that my beliefs are anywhere.
Just tell me that ghosts are possible. I just want to believe in ghosts again.
Well, the thing about a ghost, that's paradoxical to me because it seems like if you're perceiving a ghost, right, there's going to be laws about light reflecting off the body and all sorts of things. Sorry, there's like it's sort of like the way I think Harry Potter, all that magic is actually just natural stuff, right? Because in the world of Harry Potter, these things are governed by
So
laws.
hang on. So magic can be natural, but consciousness can't be natural.
So let me explain that. What J.K. Rowling is calling magic, right? I don't even know what magic is really, other than like random events pop in for no explanation. But it's not a very useful term for me at all. But the point is, what I'm saying is that there's these law-like things that happen in Harry Potter where you can mix this potion and that potion. If you do this little thing with your wand, and something will happen. To me, that's all law-like, right? And so it's just going to be natural. It's just a different kind of natural causation than the world that we know, and it's just the laws of nature are different. So
wouldn't it be a law though based upon our intentionality? So like when the wizard says some Latin phrase, they're using their intention, and then that's going to bring about.
But that's what happens here, right? I intend to drop the pen, right?
Yeah.
My mental state transitioning from to some kind of physiological state, that's not natural, right? But when the pen is falling, right, that's natural.
I see.
So if I did, fireball, whatever Latin, right? The fireball and the physics of there's going to be physics about that, right?
Beetlejuice.
Right? Yeah. I guess that I don't know. You were going somewhere with that, Emerson. I don't know.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know where you were going with. I think it's the thing about ghosts is that if I see a ghost, there's going to be light bouncing off things such that I can sense it with my eyes and stuff like that. That's all physical to me, right? So, if I saw a ghost, right, I don't see why that in principle would have to be non-natural, right? If there's a mind behind it, then that's non-natural in my view.
Yeah, I mostly just want ghosts to be real. There's not really any principled reasoning behind it. I just think it would be cool.
Okay.
But yeah, it's like they can pass through walls. They can pass through walls, but they can't like pick things up or something. It's like there's all kinds of with like their contact with.
But isn't it physically? It's physically. Wait, from what I understand, it's physically possible for me to go through a wall, right?
It is quantum tunneling.
Yeah.
You should test it out empirically right now.
Yeah, I have a wall right there. Maybe I should try it out. But the going back to your vagueness argument, this is the way I see it, right? I think that the premises of the Kalam cosmological argument are very intuitive, right? I think the Kalam, it's hard for me to sort of like give an instant response because the premises look reasonable. But the reason why teleological arguments and cosmological arguments don't work for me is because none of the premises are necessitated. And so if I have an argument, let's say I think that the argument, the problem of evil is a concrete argument against the existence of God. Let's suppose that. Maybe that's not true, but I do think it's true. That's all that you need to know to get my point here, is that I can say, look, I don't know what's going on with the Kalam. All I know is that the premises are not necessitated. I see why the premises are intuitive. I see what you're saying. I see what you're trying to do with this. But I'm sort of committed to the conclusion based on the problem of evil. That's how I see it, right? Vagueness. This argument from vagueness seems to be like a Kalam against the physicalist. The physicalist might say, oh, well, that seems like I see what you're saying there. But look, I have strong commitments about, causal closure or whatever. That you and I probably don't accept those, but that's what they're going to think, right? I have very strong.
Are you saying that it's a really good intuition pump, but in order for it to be a syllogistic argument that actually proves, you'd have to examine the rigor of its content? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Kind of. What I'm saying is that if someone has a good argument for physicalism, right, and they're committed to that, I think things like some of the premises of the Kalam or vagueness or this kind of person problem where how much do you have to chop off from another person, all of those become sorts of considerations for the physicalist, but not defeaters.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of agnostic about the nature of like persons. So a lot of these like Swinburne style arguments about like, personhood, it's like it doesn't really convince me because I'm kind of like, look, I am a subject of experience, and beyond that, I don't know. Like I'm just kind of agnostic beyond that. I don't really know what I am as a person. Like I don't have super strong intuitions one way or the other. But anyway, what's your credence in physicalism?
Like zero. Like to me, it's like I think it's so untenable. Like but I could be. What's my credence level that I have the right concept of physical? Well, that I might, I'm open, right? But if my construal of physicalism or what the physical is or natural is, then you don't understand. I'm 100%. But
Yeah.
I think that some people might call my view of physical myopic, but I think it's actually I think it's the best view of physical. But I would love to hear them. I don't think they can give me a better view of physical. But
what's great though is because like if the response to the vagueness argument is like, well, I'm already committed to physicalism due to these reasons here, usually they're gonna like say, oh, because causal closure is true. In which the panpsychist or the idealist is going to be like, yeah, I agree with that. So why are you a physicalist then?
Yeah. That's where I think, I'm right there with you, John.
Well, I was kind of struck. So the argument for the physicalist argument that I'd heard was like, okay, so step 1, physicalism entails this thing, and step 2, we can't even conceive of this thing, borderline cases. Step 3. And then it's like all these layers of complication that don't really seem to add anything, but they're kind of saying, okay, so I can't conceive of it, but that doesn't mean it's not real. And then step 4, I already have a high credence in physicalism. So I was skipping a step there, but like it's because I didn't want to try to go through their reasons for saying, even though I literally can't even fucking conceive of a borderline case, I still think there might be one. Because of all these like complicated reasons that ultimately don't change anything.
That's the nature of people on almost everything, though. Especially if you like debate them on Twitter, is like they barely register the argument that you're presenting, and they hold to the position for things that are not even close to being presented in the moment. So the argument that you're presenting is barely registering with them. It's like there's a whole galaxy of reasons why they're a materialist or physicalist or a Christian or whatever. So that's generally true.
Everyone I've met who's a physicalist, it seems to come down to the fact that there are correlations between mental states and brain states, which is like the dumbest argument. Like, because everyone knows correlation doesn't equal causation, right? Like there's like, oh, correlation, that doesn't mean there's causation. But in this one case, they're like, no, correlation means identity.
And that, or they'll say something like, well, if there were no brain, there'd be no mentality. I'm like, well, if there were no universe, there'd be no mentality. Are you the universe? Like, I'm just like, where are they getting their lives?
But they're holding the position for ideological reasons. That's the point. That's why you're not getting at what the actual substance of the it's like with you guys being atheists. It's because you want to sin. It's not because of the stuff that you're actually saying.
Let me get this clear. I definitely want to sin. Okay, so let's get that clear. Okay. But no, I think that also I try to avoid conceivability and conceive in my arguments, because I always try to replace that with it's possible, because I think I could be wrong. Conceivability has eluded me in terms of exactly what it means. But when I say that I've conceived of something, I'm just saying I grasp the concept. Or I can conceive of a world in which blah 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 blah. I'm saying I've grasped those concepts seem to cohere. And I'm almost talking about epistemic possibility when I'm talking about conceivability, right? And I feel like epistemic possibility is so weak to someone with different priors and different background.
But if something is not epistemically possible, like you can't even conceive of that state of affairs, then that should give you a reason to think that it's not metaphysically possible either.
Maybe, but what I'm trying to say is if you're saying that it's epistemically impossible that X, I might not accept that, because your epistemic possibility is being considered in terms of your background beliefs, and so you're going to be committed to certain conclusions. Nothing wrong with that. But to someone that's a physicalist, they're going to have different priors. And so just to say that I'd say it's epistemically impossible, you're like, well, to me, it's epistemically possible. Then you got to get into like logical, metaphysical, or physical possibility, I think. But I don't know. If
I get a lot of mileage out of epistemic possibility with John in our debates about compatibilism.
Wait, what was that, Emerson? He utilizes what?
No, I utilize epistemic possibility to try to argue for compatibilism. And then he gets very upset about that. He's dogmatically committed to his...
What is he dogmatically committed to?
Libertarian free will.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think I've got a good argument.
How do you overcome the randomness objection? How do you overcome that?
Yeah, so a randomness would be like if there was some other factor other than intentionality that was causing my actions to take place. But like as a libertarian, I'd say that no, it's the agent.
That's not what I take the randomness objection to be.
Well, the way that like Peter Van Inwagen talks about it is it's like if we look at all these possible worlds in which I do other than I did in this actual world, there's going to be some sort of ratio, I guess. And then from there, we can just assume, well, it must be the ratio that makes it the case that I do X versus not doing X. But that's just assuming that, oh, because there's a distribution of differing effects, that the distribution is what causally interacts or like causally has some sort of causal influence over the behaviors at all. But I would just say, no, it's a distribution that's effervescent or emergent from the decisions or choices that are made by the libertarian agent.
I'm gonna feel like Canadian Catholic here, but I don't want to. Maybe I can destroy your worldview another night, John. But
yeah, that's a good idea because like I said, I find it a good argument for libertarian freedom. We'll have to actually talk about it.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about it another time. But I think that what you take to be the randomness objections, I understand it very differently, and maybe. Yeah. I also thought that Van Inwagen did understand the randomness objection. So if you're pulling from Van Inwagen, then there might be something that I'm not understanding. But just very briefly, I just take the randomness objection to be something like, if I chose, what explains why I chose A over B? If there is an explanation, that's determinism. If there's no explanation, it seems like my choice is random.
I see what you. Yeah, that's a typical one, and that's just gonna. I'll be committed to the position that there are not contrastive explanations for why A happened over B, but there is a still explanation in the sense that there is a cause of that occurring because the agent is the one that causes it to occur.
Yeah. I'm just saying. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's fine to say that your choice was caused by the agent, and so you get out randomness. But I think that. That is the reason why I don't accept libertarian free will. It's because I give contrastive explanations all the time for why I did something rather than another thing, and that just wouldn't be true.
I think contrastive explanations are going to be derivative of the intrinsic explanation. So, like, if you were to ask me why is it the case that John is taller than Craig Reed, then giving
and better looking, right?
And better looking, yeah, exactly.
He is, but that's because he's like 20, 30 years younger. When I was his age, I was almost better looking.
So that would be like asking for a contrastive explanation there, which I mean, sure, you could give that, but the contrastive explanation itself is not going to be explicative of like my handsomeness and my height or anything like that. What is going to be explicative of that is going to be, I don't know, the genetics of my parents or something like that. So that's the case where like I don't think contrastive explanations are actually like determinative. Like contrastive explanations are there and they might serve as like some sort of explanatory function, but they don't serve as any sort of like causal function at all.
Explanations is not being causal? Okay,
no, not contrastive explanations, but you can still have intrinsic reasons for like, okay, if you were to ask me, why did you choose Taco Bell over KFC? Then you would have intrinsic reasons for Taco Bell and you would have intrinsic reasons for KFC. And then you chose between those intrinsic reasons. And then if it's the case that you chose one of those reasons, there's going to be like, okay, there's going to be a contrastive sort of explanation, but it's not a contrastive explanation in the sense that it had any sort of causal influence over my behaviors.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad. It seems like you understand the objection, which makes me feel a lot better about your libertarian-ness. But looks like Dry Apologist in the chat does not understand the.
I think Caleb wants to say that there is contrastive explanations
by appealing to agency, right?
Well, yeah, I'm an agent causal libertarian as well, but I think that what like his reason for accepting contrastive explanations is just to say that it's a reason, but it's the fact that somebody chose A over B is not going to be determinative at all.
Okay, well, if that's his position, then that's fine. But it seems like in the chat, if the question is A over B, and the agent in a world where the agent chooses A, and in a world where the agent chooses B, that's a common factor. And just taking Mill's fifth rule, the principle of difference, where like if we both jump off the same cliff and you die and I don't, the cliff is not going to explain why you died. And
So
right?
that would be assuming determinism of some sort. But like, I have independent reasons for rejecting.
Okay, I'm interested. I don't want to take more airtime on this.
Yeah,
I'm glad it
it's been
seems
2
like you
hours now.
thought about it. So we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, for sure. All right, it's been 2 hours. Craig, do you want to wrap us up, or do we have any?
Yeah, we can wrap it up.
concluding thoughts?
So
Wait, hang on. There's something Caleb said, and so Caleb and I often disagree, but we've never
This
really,
one?
huh?
What was which one? I can pull it up on screen.
No, I just opened up the YouTube video and I just started reading the chat, and he said, let's see here. Let me find.
Oh yeah, this one.
He
trash
said,
talking you in the chat.
A sufficiently strong PSR leads to modal collapse, and he disagrees.
yeah, I'm a sufficiently strong PSR leads to modal collapse.
You know, that's in a sense that's just a tautology, right? If it's strong enough,
That's what I thought.
Modal collapse, it'll go to modal collapse. That's what the word sufficiently is doing.
Yeah, I'm saying like the strongest I mean, maybe he thinks maybe we have different ideas about where the line is crossed, but like Caleb, you can at least imagine a sufficiently strong PSR that entails modal collapse, right? Like maybe you think it's a ridiculous PSR that no one should believe in, but still a sufficiently strong PSR will lead to modal collapse, right?
I agree with Emerson.
Well, of course, because you're reasonable, but I think it assumes determinism.
I think he's saying that you can have a reason for a thing occurring without that reason determining it to occur.
What does that even?
Yeah,
So what do you mean by reason?
So like a reason as in there was a cause to this event taking place, but the cause of that event did not that event does not necessarily follow just from the fact that you have some cause for it.
Yeah, he's just I guess I have a different sense of determinism. I think I mean determinism is on in the libertarian in the free will sense is that they're kind of rejecting antecedent external conditions that explain the choices of agents, right? I mean, the idea is that if there is a contrastive explanation, it's causal, right? Then that's going to be traced. Then the line is going to stop at some point to where you perceive something, and then that's causal, and then you get determinism, right?
Yeah, a sufficiently strong PSR does lead to determinism, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
It's usually the response that are put forward by critics of the PSR.
Yeah, people who want to avoid determinism, but I like determinism because it makes sense to me.
Well, no, they'll want to say determinism, but they won't want to accept modal collapse because that's ridiculous.
I mean, is it?
I was trying to think which would be a worse worldview, like a modal realism from like David Lewis, or a modal necessitarianism from like
what do you mean modal realism?
I'd be a modal realist, absolutely, over necessitarianism.
First of all, necessitarianism is obviously true, but David Lewis's view is the most like extravagant. It's even more extravagant than the multiverse.
I know. That's why I'm thinking is like, do I want an extremely barren view of like possible worlds, or do I want an extremely extravagant view? And like, I would not steal the bread, and I would not, and my family would not starve. So that's what I'm going with.
At least on Lewis's view, you can preserve modal language.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, no, you can retain modal language on necessitarianism as well. It's just all epistemic possibility. Right. It's all due to our limits, and we think, oh, I can imagine this being the case. It's like, well, that's because you're a limited creature and you don't have all the facts. But if you did, you would see that it has to be this way.
Yeah, I think that the idea is that on necessitarianism, I don't think there could be mental states.
Well, that's where you're wrong, Bucko.
There would just be necessary mental states. That's all there is.
Yeah, experiences necessitate their effects.
All right, we should close it out.
Close her up. All right, kids. So this is basically exactly what I thought would happen. Put the best and the brightest up against the best and the brightest. I didn't actually intentionally get out of the way for most of it. I got kicked out off of my phone, and then my wife came home, and I had to take the laptop down to the car, and then the laptop kicked me out, and then I was on the phone. So there was about a half hour where you guys were but it was exactly what I wanted to happen. It was a cool conversation. I thought the reason why I wanted you two in particular to talk to each other is because I I thought there was a lot of overlap on your positions. I thought it'd be an interesting conversation. And watching Danny on all the streams he's on, I think he brings a lot to the table. And he helps, like, you know, he challenges where the ideas are to be challenged, and he gives interesting pushback. And so I thought it was
And it
great.
sounds like he had a conversation with T-Jump that didn't end in a fucking dumpster fire. So
I
he's more
was
talented
on
than I am
such
already.
good behavior. You don't understand because I always bite. I have no problem biting. Like I bit John when he gave his argument for libertarian free will.
Meaning you'll push back aggressively when you need to. Is
I
that
know.
what you
Yeah, well, I think John presented his cute little PowerPoint, and then I tried to crap all over it, and I hope I didn't make him angry, but I could tell that there was something.
No,
Crushing.
I mean, that's my go-to argument, and so I hear the exact same sort of like responses all the time. So
And then Emerson and I, you know, like I bit him earlier in the stream. You know, I always have to nibble at someone to see what they're like and what kind of interlocutor they are. But because then I might find something either seriously wrong with their view, but if I can't, I'll be pedantic for like a split second to see how they respond.
Well, I will just say really quick before we go that I know that there were British people in the chat, which is why I wore this patriotic shirt here.
Yes.
So I just want to say, fuck you, England. Look at the revolutionary. Who won? Let me just ask you, who won the war? So just think about that for a second.
USA. Who is it? Dave Rollins? USA. Dave Rollins. Is he?
USA #1.
Hell yeah.
Try apologies. Caps. USA. USA. So anything else you guys want to say? I thought it was a really cool conversation. I think you guys both enjoyed it, and I thought it was really intelligent. Anything you guys want to say? We're going to speak to each other again after this.
I have no time to do this, but I'm going to propose it anyway. We should do a reading group and like schedule it and not really show up, but at least at least like something, right? Like I don't know.
I like that. I'm already part of like 3 reading groups.
Yeah, that you never read.
I never show up.
Reading what?
So you know Chris, the good Chris, the theist Chris, he's got a reading group. Thinker? Yeah, he's got a reading group on Rob Kuhn's book on metaphysics that I've been like
speaking of reading groups that you join and then don't show up for. I
haven't showed
to
up
be a part of that,
yeah.
and I forgot about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm in a phenomenology reading group right now, and I do at least 50% of the reading. So
very good. That's 50% more.
Sorry, I took a phenomenology class and I dropped out in 5 days. I was like, not doing this, but.
I kind of like it.
But a better idea is we could do one of those like where we analyze an Ariana Grande video and we all like react to it.
I like that.
Is she still doing stuff?
I think she came out with an album last year, right?
I think you're behind the times, Craig. You're an old man.
Oh, am I
like
right?
10 years ago.
Well, we could do a Madonna album. Like,
Craig, do you get bullied on your own channel? It sounds like you do.
I do, because John, that's how John is.
You basically were just like, oh, we could review a Justin Bieber video. It's like, oh, cool.
I get bullied by my wife. And it's sad. But what are you going to do?
Craig's just at the bottom of the chain of bullying. You know how you have the boss.
Because I'm the only
He's the dog that gets kicked.
I'm the true Christian. I'm humble and lovable in spirit. So people take advantage and kick me around, but I shine the love of Christ to them, and then plot destruction.
You just look forward to the eternal damnation that they'll suffer in hell.
John, bet you don't think it was funny now.
Yeah. Did you guys see that Norm Macdonald quote where he was just like, he basically gave the Aquinas view. He's just like, my idea of heaven is like, I'm, playing a harp in a field and I like look down and I see all my, all the people in hell getting fucked in the ass and stuff, which is basically a paraphrase of the actual view of Thomas Aquinas. Anyway, I think being fucked in the ass is a good place to end the stream, don't you think?
Yes. Thanks, Emerson. All right.
You're welcome.